as soon as I saw the picture
well, she's got some pictures inside there that you enjoy looking at.
Sure you want those if you want them for anything. If anything happens to me, what's going to happen to all my old pictures? My kids,
what was her name?
Una Lamb.
There's only a minute.
Una Lamb.
We don't get a
and she taught here 63 years ago.
Or something or other. Because
I want to get her.
She was real old when she taught her.
How old did you say?
I said you were real old when you taught her.
5. This was my first.
oh, was it?
I came down to visit my grandfather after my father was teaching for my ministry. And somebody said, well, don't you have to speak? So I went to speak about
So that got you in a lot of trouble.
He broke that camera?
Yep, he broke the camera.
May we pray? Most kind and helpful God, creator of our world, giver of our lives, provider of worthy goals, and encourager of our every success, we thank you for this special place where children and young people have grown in awareness and achievement over the years. Thank you for giving our forebears vision and social responsibility for our kids and our society. Thanks for this community center dedicated to the uplifting of human life. We thank you for the special people who taught here, who attended this school and grew into adulthood here in Dixboro, who left this setting then to serve locally and far beyond this village. We are glad to recognize those who've come today and to remember lovingly those whose service is complete now and who enjoy the fullness of your presence. Share these ceremonies and keep us ever in your loving care. In Christ we pray. Amen.
Okay, we'd like to conduct now a roll call of the classes, and what we'd like to do as we read the years that have occurred since the school began, that we'd like to have you raise your hand if you were part of that era. First of all, do we have anyone here that attended the schoolhouse during the 1950s? Raise your hand. The 1940s. That was an exciting decade. The 1930s. All the third grade. This is where it gets interesting. The 1920s. Anyone who attended between 1915 and 1920? How about between 1910 and 1915? Anybody prior to 1910? Right back here, Fred Schmidt. What year did you start here, Fred? 1909? And for those of you that don't know, Fred just lives across the street, so he also gets the award for traveling the fewest number of miles to get here. On that subject, I thought it would be interesting to see how far people did travel to come here today. Anyone present that thinks they came perhaps from the furthest distance within the state boundaries? Who from the state of Michigan came a fair distance to get here today? Anyone? Anybody from the Upper Peninsula? Northern Lower Michigan? Kalamazoo. Anybody can beat that? What's that, 100 miles or so?
Further away than me.
Okay, and I know we have some visitors from out of state, and I think I can safely say this unless someone else knows otherwise. Bud and Billy Leslie came all the way from Florida. Anybody travel further away from Michigan than Florida? Let's hear a round of applause. That's a long ways. And now we'd like to move into the reason that we're really here this afternoon, and that is to receive a certificate that will officially commemorate the Centennial observance. I'd like to call forward Patrick Owen. Patrick is president of the Washtenaw County Historical Society, and again, Pastor Marble, who will accept the certificate.
Well, I'm very pleased to see so many people here today. It's really nice to see a good turnout. I'll make it brief. It's my very deep and sincere pleasure to present this certificate on behalf of the Washtenaw County Historical Society in recognition of the centennial of this fine red brick schoolhouse. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. That's very nice. Very nice token of recognition, and I accept it very gratefully. I'm glad that you have an interest in how we're doing, and we're glad to have an interest in the community, to be a center where people can come together. The schoolhouse over the years and the church have served as a point for us, and we're glad to be in this setting. Location is very important. Even more important is serving the purposes, and we hope we can continue to serve the traditions of the school and of the community.
Thank you, gentlemen. I might mention that for those of you that are interested, we have some souvenirs that we are selling at the table up front. Souvenir hats and shirts, and we also have some pictures of the schoolhouse which we are selling as well, so please take advantage of that if you are so interested. We also have a guest book that we'd like to have former students and teachers sign. If you haven't done so, please do so before you leave this afternoon. The next item on the program is we'd like to have former students and teachers, or both, who have some personal remembrances that they'd like to share with the group to feel free to come forward and do just that. And to kind of set the tone for that, I'd like to bring Ivan back, who has a list of sorts that he'd like to read. Ivan.
You can't have a school without having pupils, but you can't have a school without having teachers. And with help from a lot of people, I have a list of people who were teachers at this school sometime during the last 100 years. And then we'd like to see if some of them are here besides the owner and myself. Mary Banghart was an early teacher. Ada Rowe, Clara McCormick, Carrie Wright, Edith Townsend, Bert Foster, Nellie Brokaw, Althea Short, May Izzo, Letty Wiley, Edith Judson Willits, that's Carol's mother, Agnes McKinnon, Anna Madison, Lulu Nanry, a Mrs. Loomis, who was the wife of a minister, Lena Bartlett Stabler, Leola Quackenbush Leslie, Gertrude Miller White, Marion Miller Salnis, Mildred Shanklin McDonald, Emily Freeman Reed, Emma Fisher, Florence Willets Bissell, Alta Fisher, Carrie Crippen, Una Lamb, and Una Lamb is right here. She was my 8th grade teacher. Let's give her a fine hand. She lives in Saline now, and I saw her last when I think we dedicated the Freeman School a few years ago. She's pretty faithful in getting back to see the schools. Mrs. Ralph Harper, Helen Anderson, who taught, I believe, some 6 years or so. Myself, Ivan Parker. My sister, Leona Parker. Sarah Rice Blair. Nancy Staley Winchester. Where is Nancy? Someone said she's here today. Where is Nancy? She was here earlier. She's gone home. It's just more than they can take, you know, sometimes. Gertrude Haynes, Terry Ainsley, Mrs. Claude Eggerson, a Mrs. Reagans. Does anyone know her first name? And Mrs. Reagans? That was Sylvia. Jean Spencer, Doris Bodine, Mrs. Phillips, and a Ruby Bissell. So I think that concludes the... Oh, wait.
Midge Coleridge, and I think she was the last teacher.
Oh, there was a Mitch Coleridge who might have been the... C-O-L-D-R-E-N? Is a Miss Coldren. There she is. You taught the last time this was a school here then. Let's give her an extra good hand. Did you go on up the other school then? No, this is it. I was thinking one thing. My sister was telling about having people the same name. I remember I had Dorothy's all over the place. Dorothy Leslie, Dorothy Vandenbosch, and Dorothy Wolf. And they all in the 5th grade. So when you got that class going, you better tell which one you wanted to recite, because you just couldn't say, well, Dorothy, what about this? They had a kind of a monopoly on that name. We're going to talk about first when I was a student here, and then later when I was a teacher here, and my sister had the same privilege of being a student here and later a teacher here, and we cooperated very well in that I started Don Cook in the 1st grade and she finished him up in the 8th grade. Now that's cooperation you don't see these days. I would say it was about 70 years ago that I came here as a beginner, 1918. And I remember a few things about the school in those few days. Mildred Shanklin was my first teacher. And when we got to school, we better have a memory gym. So just before I would leave for school, if I didn't have one, I'd ask my mother, my grandmother, someone, how about a memory gym? And they say, well, a fool and his money is soon parted. So I had one for that day. Next day I had to have another memory gem. They always started the day with a memory gem or a bit of news. This school was built 100 years ago in 1888. It took 4 months to build it, and they had 4 men building it. It cost about $1,200. In those days, you could build a school pretty fast because what you had to do was to lay up the walls, put on a roof, hang a bell, get a blackboard or two inside, and maybe a table and chairs. You didn't have to have any electricity. You didn't have to have any plumbing. That was out back, right and left. Ladies and gents, little houses out there, which are handy. Also, you didn't have much of a place to heat it. They had a wood stove. Within 4 feet of the stove, you were comfortable. 8 feet away, you began to get chilled. At 15 feet away, icicles froze in your nose. It was that cold. Anyway, that was the story there. The well here never did work. When I was starting to school here, we used to go down to the Gales and get the water. And later, we got it from the garage. And I think sometimes we used to go over to the store and get it. This water here was never good. There was 2 entrances to the school when I came here. One went to a right entry, one to a left entry. This was later remodeled into one entry, and then you get on the inside to the entryways. We had double seats, 2 in a seat, and in the winter, you brought your lunches in, put them as close to the stove as possible so they didn't freeze. Some of us walked a mile or so by the time we got here. Our sandwiches were frozen solid. It took nearly noon to get them out. The year I was started, the big boys were Foster Quackenbush, George Stebb, Malcolm Hollis, and Bill Short. I also remember that Catherine Miller was a student here, and we had some Edwards children, Reverend Edwards. Sheila and Calvin were their names. There was a tradition in those days carried on for quite a while. When lunchtime came, the boys ran out, climbed up in a tree, found their spike up there to hang their dinner pail on, and enjoyed their food 15 or 20 feet in the air. I was talking to Cecil a few minutes ago. I think on that tree out there, I could probably go up about 15 feet and still find the spike that I put in there about 1923. One of the things that we used to bring to school was hard-boiled eggs. I remember one time when it was the winter and you couldn't eat in the trees, we were eating in the woodshed, which stood next to the school here. And I believe it was Foster Quackenbush took out his boiled egg, reached over to Malcolm Hollis, and cracked the egg. Whop! It was not boiled. Raw. What a time they had about that. He had egg all over his hand. The other fellow had egg all down his neck. And it looked like we were going to have a civil war for a time. There were quite a number of games played. This porch was here, and at that time you could get under the porch. It was a different kind of porch. And we used to use this as a goal line, and another one down there, and we played games such as Pom, Pom, Pull Away, or Prisoner's Goal. Or if we had a ball, we would throw the ball over the woodshed and play ante-I over. And as they got stronger, we sometimes threw the ball over the schoolhouse and played ante-I over. You ran around the ball behind your back, and you tried to touch someone or throw the ball, hit them. The big game, though, was softball. One time, Joe Nanry and Ray Sheaf were playing Cecil Quackenbush and myself in a game of softball. Home plate was out here, first base, second base, third base, and the county school commissioner came along. It was recess, and he said, "Are you boys having a good time?" "Yes, sir." He said, "What is the score?" "The score is 45-0. He said, "That's pretty one-sided, isn't it?" I said, "No, we haven't been to bat yet." So And we used to play 9 innings. We had a big, thick tablet. We'd keep score. Pitcher's box was out. Just 2 batters. You could get to first base, then you run back home. And it was quite an affair. During the time I was a student here, I was the only one in my class. I never had anyone else in the grade with me. That is what you would call individualized instruction. But it was kind of lonesome sometimes because every time you got a lesson, you had to do it. If you got up front and the teacher says, "What do you know about Bolivia?" and you said, "I'm sorry, I didn't read about Bolivia," you got sent back to study upon Bolivia, and you had your class at recess. You learned that was the best way to do it. I knew also that assignments were pretty easy in those days. My arithmetic book had 120 pages. We had 120 days of school. So the first day of school, the teacher said, "Ivan, you do a page a day." The first day, page 1. Second day, page 2. I got an old fat tablet and a calendar, and I started in on it. Page 1, September 7, page 2, and so on. One day this Mr. Esri came, and I looked at him and I said, "Oh, he's a good-looking man." The teacher said, "Ivan, why don't you get out your arithmetic for tomorrow?" I said, "Ma'am, it's done." She said, "Well, how about your arithmetic for the next day?" I said, "It's done." She said, "How about your arithmetic for the next day?" I said, "It's done." This was in November. He came over, he said, "Young man, what page are you working on in arithmetic?" I said, "I'm working on April 16th. So I got my work done pretty well on arithmetic before Christmas. I had read every book in the library. We didn't have a very big library, but I like to read. So finally I found one book I had read. It was called the Unabridged Dictionary. And I had my bookmark. And every afternoon I used to go up and read for an hour in that dictionary. I think it didn't help me too much in knowledge, but it seemed to help my spelling, because I saw some words in there that I had never seen before. And whenever you had a spell down, the first thing you know, people would give you one of those words. A highlight of our school was going to the county fair as a ship of state. We had a wagon and were dressed as sailors, and we had Carol Freeman, the person holding up the torch. We rode all the way around the fairgrounds, and I think we won 3rd place. We also had hot lunches. And in Carol's book, she tells about a time when Cecil and I and she were to cook rice. And it got going. They said 2 cups of rice. We said that's not enough, so we put in 6 cups of rice. We had rice, and we stirred it, and more rice, and we learned rice you did not cook in quantity. Finally, there was at the front of this school in a big case, that was the old museum. That came largely from the instructor, where a girl in Wyoming wrote she would like some wood from different parts of the country, and she would send things from Wyoming. A group of us got together and sent her maple and poplar and elm and all the common woods here, and they sent back the woods from the Wyoming. And then later, a man came up from Florida and brought us a lot of stuff from there. That was the museum, about 1925. The big change came in Dixboro about 1925 when the road was paved, and that made a change quite different. Up to that time, when you got to the 7th grade or 8th grade, you had to go into town and write your final exam at the courthouse. That was a mixed blessing. Besides worrying about that, then I found I could get to the Sugar Bowl and get a Sunday, which was very good. When I came to teach here, I was in my 3rd year of teaching and 20 years old. I had been working with the Scouts and the Sunday School and the 4-H. Then I got a chance to teach here. I remember that everybody knew me as Ivan, but I also decided that I would have to be Mr. Parker in the school grounds. So I got a big stack of paper, and the first thing I announced, my name is Mr. Parker. If you forget, you will write 100 times, my teacher's name is Mr. Parker. If you miss it twice, 200 times. Next time, 400 times, till it got through to you. And you did this at recess time. This was a bright bunch of youngsters. At the end of the year, I still had my stack of paper. And I don't remember anyone calling me by Ivan when I heard them. Well, they may have gotten away with that. My 8th grade of Bernard Smid and Bud Leslie were first graders when I was 8th grader here. That was kind of an interesting coincidence. I think I've seen both of them around here today. Glad that you could make it back. The first week of school, a man stopped at our house and said, "There's a man murdered down by your lane." And my dad and I went out, and there lay a gangster from downriver, his head blown open. I had to go to school. They found out that this man had been murdered and dumped off there. At noon, Bernard Smid came back from eating his lunch at home, and he said, "I know why you look so peaked." That was quite a shock to start out a school year with a murder on your hand. The school at that time had 3 predominant families. If you were not a Foster, you were a Bennett. If you were not a Bennett, you were a Vanden Bosch. And about 1/3 of the school had that, and if they got the flu all at one time, we had very few people here. Some changes in the building. We had double doors, we had a better floor, and we had a real event. They called and said the draft Zeppelin is coming. And it was flying from Chicago to Detroit. And we all got out and watched that big draft Zeppelin right over Dixboro. And that day we remember pretty well. And I know we had Dr. Maddy of the University of Michigan would broadcast music lessons to us. He later was the one in Interlochen, and at that time we had a Mrs. Erickson of Ipsy come and give us music lessons, which were very well liked. The predecessor before me was Helen Anderson, who was here 6 years, and she taught a lot of art. I took a course in art so I could at least know what a vanishing point was, and we tried to continue it. The other thing that happened was that the Winnetka system of individualized instruction for half-day was adopted here under Dr. Turner. And that was a very interesting experience and one that I'll remember. I think I've used all my time, and Leona came and taught 7 years after I was here, and she has some different memories. We both enjoyed both being students and teachers here. Leona Parker Bunnell.
Not used to those things. I started school in 1926, and when I started school, Carrie Cribben was our teacher, but she became ill, and our minister's wife, Mrs. Ralph Harper, had to finish the year. But wouldn't you know, that summer she died, and I remember the day of her funeral very well. My mother thought it was too traumatic for us to attend the funeral, so she left me home. And while she was gone, on the Dixboro Road, which was just a little one-way gravel road, a Model T Ford came along and ran over my pet cat, Whitey. And I felt terrible about losing my cat. When I went to school here, those 6 years I attended here, Bud Leslie, who was here today, Doug Gibb, Bernard Smid, and I were in the biggest class in school. And today is very exciting to me. Not only is this the 100th anniversary, but tonight I go to my 50th class, high school class reunion. So it's really a big day for me. One thing I remember that we did when I was here at school, we had lots and lots of snow. So we built an Eskimo house, like an igloo. We built over the top and made it so we could crawl inside. It seems like 15 or 20 of us could get in, and I'm sure no more than 2 or 3 could get in at a time. We brought sawdust from the garage and made a nice floor. And then we took turns going in and out of the Eskimo house. One day we came out, and when it was our turn to go in, the girls, there was a sign put on the side of it. It said NGA, and they wouldn't let us in. So we finally found out that the NGA stood for No Girls Allowed. So if we couldn't go in, they weren't going to stay in there because we were going to smash the top down, and we did. Now, when I would have been in the 8th grade, my brother came here to teach. And my mother said, I'm not going to have you two in the same school. So I went to Ann Arbor to school. Then in 1940, after years had passed, I came back to teach here. And as my brother said, the late Donald Cook was my 8th grader that he'd had in the 1st grade. I had the Cook family. There was the 3 boys, Russ, Junior, and Donald. Then I had the Durstons. There were 4 of them. The Durston twins were good and strong, and I really needed them because I had a coal furnace. And on Monday morning, I would get here about 6 o'clock in the morning after walking from the farm to get here, and it would be cold. And I'd have to get the fire going so the kids wouldn't be colder when they got here because they all walked. So I was glad to have some healthy big boys carrying in my wood and coal. Then there's Jack Snedeker. I saw him here somewhere today. He was my 5th grader. He, I shouldn't tell tales on him, but this always tickled me. He was in geography class all by himself. He was reading his story about India. And he stopped and looked at me, and I said, what's the matter? And he says, well, why do they have scared cows run around their streets? What he had read was they have sacred cows on the streets in India. Then I had 3 Nancys. Nancy Schmid, Trotter, and I remember when she was born, because I was in the 5th grade, and we all had to stop and make a detour to see the new baby. We thought she was beautiful. Then there was Nancy Quackenbush and her brother Jerry, and Nancy Staley, who I've seen today. And then there was the Cummings children. There were 4 of them. There's Clayton out here, and Eugene, and Joyce, and Denny, Barbara Martin, Ann Gale down here, Joyce Bullets, and then we had Teddy Pong. Teddy was a very interesting little fellow, and he could read like mad. And one day he stopped reading, so I told him the next word. And he looked at me and said, but Miss Parker, don't you even stop for periods? So then I had Autumn and Richard Freeman. And I don't know if I got you all named or not, but there was an awful lot of you kids, and there's quite a few of you here today. This was 1940. Well, 1941, Pearl Harbor, December 7th. And everybody was shook up about it. And the ration books come out. As a teacher, I issued all the ration books for the community. We had sugar and the canned goods and the gasoline ones. And then that June, afterwards, I was married, and my husband enlisted that July. But I stayed on to teach 1 more year. That year was quite eventful. We had scrap metal drives. I don't know where all that scrap metal come from, but we had a mountain of it here. And the county had given us some names where to sell it, so we sold the scrap metal. And from that, the school board gave me some money to buy books with for the school. It was badly needed. I taught that 1 year, and ending in 1943, I joined my husband in California. He was stationed at the Victorville Army Air Base. And then, would you believe, it took 40 more years. In 1983, I moved back to this area and transferred back to the Dixboro Church. 2 children, 2 grandchildren later. As my mother used to say, if you live long enough, you go full cycle. And I think I did. Thank you.
And now we'd like to move into the reason that we're really here this afternoon, and that is to receive a certificate that will officially commemorate the Centennial observance. I'd like to call forward Patrick Owen. Patrick is president of the Washtenaw County Historical Society, and again, Pastor Marble, who will accept the certificate.
Well, I'm very pleased to see so many people here today. It's really nice to see a good turnout. I'll make it brief. It's my very deep and sincere pleasure to present this certificate on behalf of the Washtenaw County Historical Society in recognition of the centennial of this fine red brick schoolhouse. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. That's very nice.
Very nice token of recognition, and I accept it very gratefully. I'm glad that you have an interest in how we're doing, and we're glad to have an interest in the community, to be a center where people can come together. The schoolhouse over the years and the church have served as a point for us, and we're glad to be in this setting. Location is very important. Even more important is serving the purposes, and we hope we can continue to serve the traditions of the school and of the community.